I own 3 different 40mm lenses, and before you call me crazy, let me explain why this is actually not as ridiculous as it sounds. So how does someone end up with 3 lenses at exact the same focal length? It's a longer story than you might think, and it really does begin with my history with Nikon. I've been shooting Nikon for what feels like a lifetime. I started with a tiny Nikon Coolpix compact, then moved on to the D5000 and then the D90, and for many years I traveled the world with the legendary D800, a camera that, by the way, was Nikon's first full frame body to push 36 megapixels back in 2012, a resolution that was almost unheard of that time. But I did take a detour. For about a year and a half I switched over to Fuji. But the moment Nikon announced the Z series, I picked one up in a store, felt the grip in my hand, and I knew immediately I had to come home. Since landscapes are what I shoot most often, the very first lens I bought for my Nikon Z6, which was my first Nikon Z camera, was the 1424 f2.8. Later, when I started filming more seriously, I added the 1430 f4, which turned out to be a far better companion on a gimbal. And finally, when I got curious about cinema lenses, I ordered my first one, the 7 Artisans 40mm T2.8. So today I want to walk you through each of them, show you exactly why all 3 earned a permanent spot in my bag, and then take them out into the field for a real-world comparison. So let's start with the lens that started it all. So back in my D800 days, I had the f-mount version of this lens. I absolutely loved that lens. So when Nikon announced the Z-mount, there was zero hesitation. This was going to be the first big lens I would buy for my Z6. It was love at the first sight. But it also came with the exact same problem the original had: filters. The old version had this huge dome-like front element. If you wanted to use any kind of filter, you needed a massive square filter holder system with slot-in filters. Expensive, heavy and fiddly. The new Z version is less domed, but Nikon still made a strange decision. The only way to mount a filter is to use the dedicated 112mm filter system that screws onto the lens hood. 112mm. Let that sink in. None of my standard 82mm filters fit. It means an extra investment in a completely separate filter system. On a gimbal, this whole setup is nothing short of a nightmare. To make it worse, when I bought this lens, there was no variable ND filter available in 112mm size, which made filming with this lens in a bright daylight extremely painful. But here's the part that genuinely frustrates me. Look at this lens carefully. If you remove the 112mm lens hood completely, the lens still has a small fixed non-removable hood built right into the front, and if you simply rest a standard 82mm filter on the top of that fixed hood, the filter doesn't even touch the front element. You would expect heavily vignetting at 14mm with an 82mm filter sitting that close to the glass, right? There is nothing, absolutely nothing. Which makes me wonder why on earth Nikon didn't just engineer this lens with an 82mm filter thread from the factory. Honestly, I'm holding out hope for a Mark II version with an 82mm thread. So Nikon, if you are listening, please make this happen. Despite all of this, I'm not selling it. The image quality for still is genuinely outstanding. The f2.8 aperture gives you that lovely shallow depth of field even at 40mm. And the corners are sharp, wide open. As a photography lens, it is still a class of its own. The day Mark II arrives with a normal filter thread, that is the day I will reconsider. This one should have been a perfect wide-angle video lens for Nikon Z system. It really should have been, but it's not. And let me explain why. Unlike the 1424, the 1430 doesn't have an internal zoom. The barrel physically extends as you change the focal length, and that matters more than you might think when you're filming on a gimbal. Every time you change the focal length, a center of gravity shifts and the gimbal needs to be rebalanced. That kills spontaneity. If Nikon ever releases a Mark II version of this lens with an internal zoom, even at f4, that would be an absolute dream. In terms of pure image quality, the gap between 1424 f2.8 and the 1430 f4 is honestly not as big as people make it out to be. Yes, the 1424 is a touch sharper, especially in corners, and yes, sunstars look slightly more defined, but we are talking about minimal differences here. Most viewers would never spot it. Where the 4030 absolutely wins is weight. This thing is light. For travel, and especially for hiking, where every gram on your back matters, by the third hours of climbing, I will reach for the 4030 every single time. And here's the kicker. The 1430 f4 has a standard 82mm filter thread. Every variable ND filter, every polarizer, every gradient filter I already own simply works. No extra system, no extra spend. For travel, for hiking, for video work where you set your focal length and commit to it, this hands down the lens I grab first. Now this one. This is where some of you are going to ask why on earth would you buy a third 40mm? But let me answer that. Cinema lenses have something that modern photography lenses simply do not have: character. Modern mirrorless lenses are engineered to be clinically sharp, technically flawless, and almost completely sterile. A Cine lens is the opposite. It has personality, it has texture, it has look you can feel. There is also the manual focus aspect. When you are forced to focus by hand, you slow down. You plan your shot, you commit to a frame, and 9 times out of 10, the discipline produces better footage than trusting autofocus to figure out the scene for you. And yes, you can switch the other two lenses into manual focus mode, but almost no one actually does. And the focus rings on autofocus lenses are fly-by-wire. They simply don't have the tactile feedback of a real Cine ring. Now let's talk about this lens itself. The 7 Artisans 40mm T2.9 is a budget Cine lens. You can find it for around 300 euros. And for that price, the build quality genuinely surprised me. The barrel is solid metal. The image quality is also impressive for what you are paying. It has that subtle Cine character I was talking about. Not heavy-handed, but it is definitely here. Quick note for anyone new to cinema lenses. You may have noticed I said T2.9 instead of f2.9. That is not a typo. The T stands for transmission stop. F-stops are theoretical mathematical numbers based on the physical opening of the aperture. T-stops measure how much light actually reaches the sensor after passing through every single piece of glass inside the lens. For filming, where exposure needs to be exact and predictable from shot to shot, the T-stops are far more useful. This 7 Artisans is fixed at 40mm with a perfect 82mm filter thread. Ideal for gimbal, ideal for travel, but it's not flawless. The aperture and focus rings are not as buttery smooth as I would like. You need to apply some real force. And yeah, the strangest things in backlight situation. This lens produces a slightly odd flare. At first I assumed it was my filter causing it, but no, it does it without filter too. Still for the money. you are paying, this lens punches well above its weight. Three 14mm lenses, side by side, tested under perfectly controlled conditions, right here at home. A quick word on the methodology, because a lens comparison is only actually useful if it's generally fair. I locked in completely identical settings across all three lenses. 24 frames per second, the classic 180 degrees shutter rule that gives you natural cinematic motion blur. Same white balance, same aperture at f4 or t4.3 where possible, because that is the only common ground all three lenses share. And base ISO at 800, which on the Nikon ZR delivers an incredibly clean signal thanks to its dual native ISO architecture. Same tripod position, same lighting, same scene. The only variable in this entire test is the glass itself. Watch the corners. That is where cheaper lenses fall apart and where premium glass earns its price tag. Watch the contrast, how each lens handles the subtle gradation between deep shadows and bright highlights. And watch closely how each one renders the highlights themselves, because that is where the personality of every lens really starts to show. The differences are real, but they are subtle. And that is actually the entire point of this video. If you are expecting one lens to absolutely obliterate the others, that is not what is going to happen here. What you are going to see is different tools, each making slightly different creative choices. All three lenses show some barrel distortion at 14mm, but that is simply physics. But the 7 Artisans gives you the rawest, most uncorrected look, which some filmmakers actively prefer for that organic, adjacent feel. The two Nikon Z lenses both apply automatic correction profiles when you're recording internally. Some people will hate it, some people will love it. I'm somewhere in between. Color rendering is another quiet difference worth flagging. The two Nikon lenses produce a very neutral, modern color profile. The 7 Artisans pulls slightly warmer, slightly less saturated. Then there is what happens when you open the f2.8 and the T2.9 lenses all the way to their widest apertures, because that is where things really start to separate from the f4 lens. The 1424 wide open at 2.8 gives you a level of subject separation that is genuinely impressive at 14mm. You don't normally associate that focal length with shallow depth of field, but with a close subject and a distant background, the 1424 absolutely delivers. The bokeh is clean and the circular near the center. The 7 Artisans wide open at 2.9 delivers something completely different. That creamy, cinematic fell-off that no autofocus zoom is ever going to give you. Softer, more painterly, with a roundness in the out-of-the-focus areas that simply feels filmic. The 1430 f4 cannot compete here, and that is completely fine. That lens was never designed for this. It is a working tool for travel and everyday video, not a shallow depth of field weapon. So which one wins? Honestly, that depends entirely on what you are shooting and the feel you are going for. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about right now. So here's the honest answer to the question you have been asking since the beginning of this video. All three of them are staying. Yes, all three. The 1424 f2.8 stays as my dedicated photography weapon. The image quality and the f2.8 aperture are simply too good to give up. The Nikon Z 1430 f4 stays as my travel and hiking lens. Lightweight, 82mm filter thread, the perfect companion on the trail. And the 7 Artisans 14mm T2.9 stays as my cinematic look lens for video projects, where I want that bit of texture and a deliberate manual plan approach. If Nikon ever releases a Mark II of them 1424 with an 82mm filter thread, or a Mark II from the 1430 with the internal zoom, I'm absolutely going to reconsider. So Nikon, please do it. And the 7 Artisans. This is staying in my bag until somebody makes a better budget wide-angle cine lens. So far, nobody has. If you found this useful, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let me know down in the comment which 14mm lens you would actually pick up. Until next time, keep shooting. Peace.